The Pedrail wheel is a type of wheel developed in the early 20th century for all-terrain locomotion. It was used in agricultural machinery. Pedrail wheels should not be confused with Dreadnaught wheels, which have articulated rails attached at the rim for the wheel to roll over. Definition: according to the 1913 Webster's Revised Unabridged Dictionary, a pedrail is a device intended to replace the wheel of a self-propelled vehicle for use on rough roads and to approximate to the smoothness in running of a wheel on a metal track. The tread consists of a number of rubber shod feet which are connected by ball and socket joints to the ends of sliding spokes. Each spoke has attached to it a small roller which in its turn runs under a short pivoted rail controlled by a powerful set of springs. This arrangement permits the feet to accommodate themselves to obstacles even such as steps or stairs. Invention: the Pedrail wheel was invented in 1903 by the Londoner Brahma Joseph Diplock. It consists in the adjunction of feet to the rail of a wheel, in order to improve traction and facilitate movement in uneven or muddy terrain. Sophisticated Pedrail wheels were designed with individual suspension for each foot, which would facilitate the contact with uneven terrain. Brahma Joseph Diplock also invented the Pedrail locomotive, which was featured in the 7th of February 1904 New York Times. Fiction: H.G. Wells, in his short story The Land Ironclads, published in the Strand magazine in December 1903, described the use of large, armored cross-country vehicles armed with automatic rifles and moving on pedrail wheels to break through a system of fortified trenches, disrupting the defense and clearing the way for an infantry advance. They were essentially long, narrow and very strong steel frameworks carrying the engines, and borne upon 8 pairs of big pedrail wheels, each about 10 feet in diameter, each driving wheel and set upon long axles free to swivel round a common axis. This arrangement gave them the maximum of adaptability to the contours of the ground. They crawled level along the ground with one foot high upon a hillock and another deep in a depression, and they could hold themselves erect and steady sideways upon even a steep hillside. In War and the Future, Wells acknowledged Diplock's Pedrail as the origin for his idea of an all-terrain armored vehicle. The idea was suggested to me by the contrivances of a certain Mr. Diplock, whose pedrail notion, the notion of a wheel that was something more than a wheel that would take locomotives up hillsides and across plowed fields, was public property nearly 20 years ago. Although Wells describes the pedrail wheels in detail, a number of authors have mistakenly taken his description to be of some form of caterpillar track. Diplock's version of an endless track was not designed until some 10 years after the publication of Wells' story. The pedrail wheel played no part in the design of the first British tanks. Abandonment of the wheel and development of the chain track. In 1910, Diplock abandoned the pedrail wheel and began developing what he called the chain track, in which fixed wheels ran on a moving belt. Very like the caterpillar track as it is now understood, it was a complicated and high-maintenance system, and in 1914 Diplock eventually produced a version on a simpler, single-wide track. With the body fitted, the machine could carry a ton of cargo and be pulled with minimal effort by a horse. It demonstrated the attributes of the caterpillar track: low friction and low ground pressure. World War I. During World War I, as trench warfare immobilized the front, a number of proposals were made for machines that could cross no man's land to enemy lines, and experiments were conducted with the pedrail system. In January 1915, Flight Commander Thomas Hetherington of the Royal Naval Air Service saw a demonstration of one of Diplock's track trucks, was impressed by its maneuverability, and bought it with a view to mounting a bulletproof shield for protecting infantry. During the discussions that led to the formation of the Landships Committee, Hetherington showed the truck to Winston Churchill, who found he was able to pull the fully laden vehicle himself. The Landships Committee, established by Churchill in February 1915, conducted experiments and tests of various vehicles in its attempts to create an armored fighting vehicle, and the Pedrail track was amongst the technologies considered. The initial Pedrail design, coming from Murray Suiter's discussions with Diplock, was for a 25-ton vehicle on 2 tracks carrying a 12-pounder gun in a turret. In March 1915, Compton redesigned it as a 40-foot-long vehicle that could carry a storming party of 50 troops protected by 8 mm of armor plate. Churchill ordered the building of 18 experimental landships, 12 using Diplock Pedrails, and 6 using large wheels. Construction failed to move forward, as the wheels seemed impractical, and the Pedrails met with industrial problems. When these attempts had failed by July 1915, continuous tracks were tested, and they soon became the technique of choice for the development of the tank. The Pedrail was considered as too weak for an all-terrain armored machine, and Caterpillar continuous tracks were ultimately preferred. The Pedrail machine contract was initially with Foden but passed to Birmingham Carriage and Wagon in April 1915. In order that it would be able to move through French towns and villages, the design was altered to articulate in the middle. It was also reduced in height and side armor increased to 12 mm to give better protection from rifle fire. BCW asked to be released from the contract so they could concentrate on other work, and so the contract, now reduced to 1 machine, passed on to Foster's of Lincoln. Work stopped on the Pedrail as it was too heavy and better designs were in the offing, but the parts already constructed were used by Stoddart and Ampert to assemble a flamethrower carrying vehicle for the trench warfare department in 1916. Weighing 32 tons and laden, it achieved 15 miles per hour from 2 100-horsepower engines. Bibliography: Harris, J.P. Men, Ideas, and Tanks. British Military Thought and Armoured Forces, 1903–1939 War, Armed Forces and Society 1, Manchester University Press, ISBN 0-7190-3762-X. Wells, Herbert George. War and the Future, Kessinger, ISBN 0-497-97078-3. White, B.T., British Tanks 1915–1945, Shepperton, Ian Allen.